Hi, and welcome to this week's Qredible live broadcast. I'm excited this week to welcome Dr. Bryan Quoc to the show. Close enough, okay? Hopefully. Very excited because Bryan has a really interesting role in our space, and I think that he's going to have some great thoughts to share with us. So just a little background, Bryan is a food scientist, consultant, and author of 150 Food Science Questions Answered, which was published by Simon & Schuster. He holds a Ph.D. in food science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he studied the biological effects of savory flavors from plant-based sources, which is so relevant for us. Bryan is the founder and principal consultant now of Mendocino Food Consulting, where he advises companies ranging from emerging startups to major food brands like Blue Diamond Growers and Turtle Tree. His work has been recognized globally. In 2023, he was named Food Science Consultant of the Year by Global Vegan Awards. Beyond consulting, Bryan is also a faculty research fellow at Pacific Lutheran University, focusing on sustainable food innovations and alternative proteins. He's collaborated with the Good Food Institute, served as a startup mentor for CoMotion Labs, and is a research scholar with the Ronan Institute.
Anything more you want to add to that, Bryan?
I was like, there's actually more, but I think I'll stop there. So we are so excited. I guess first we need to know, are you a vegan?
Ooh, I am not a vegan.
Okay.
I only play one on the TV. No, the truth is I really like working in that space because it's very technically challenging. There's a lot of new scientific updates, but I myself am not a vegan.
Well, they seem to have embraced you wholeheartedly, as has the cannabis community. So we're excited today for you to weigh in on our side of the world and give us your insights. So welcome.
He's also not a slacker with all that.
Yeah. So maybe too much.
So well, I knew you weren't a vegan because I know you like fish sauce. So
That's right.
But hey, listen, this is I was so excited to have you on because when you look at what's going on in this cannabis industry, we've got, as of like 2025, we've got like 100 new cannabis beverage brands that have entered the market, and and it's continuing to grow. I mean, since January of 2021, we've seen that number continue to grow at like 65%. And now we see these brands in Total Wine and ABC Fine Wines and Spirits, and so consumers are starting to see these in the normal places that they shop for things like alcohol, right? And it's really crazy because we're seeing this major growth in Canada as well, and it's even more intense in Canada. We're seeing like 300% from 2021 to 2024 in the growth. So we see brands like Tilray and Heineken and Curaleaf Canopy Growth, Keef brands. So there's this massive movement into this, and we're excited because you're here to talk about this massive growth trend and, quite frankly, the emerging intersection between food science, cannabis regulation, and what consumers are looking for. So that's really the exciting part about this talk. And, to kick it off, really, I really am curious, and I know our audience wants to hear, what are the scientific challenges that you see in actually creating a beverage that doesn't taste like you're licking the lawn or, like hamburgers?
Yeah, it's a wild space because, flavor chemistry requires so many different aspects. I mean, there's the actual taste itself. So, bitterness is a big key aspect of cannabis beverages. Trying to reduce it or even amplify it depending on the consumer market, depending on who is actually drinking these things. So you've got so much bifurcation of different audiences. But then beyond that, there's also acidity. There's also factors like, is it going to be too astringent, or, does it give you kind of a puckering texture? What's sort of like the mouthfeel? And there's so all these aspects play into sort of the consumer preference. And to do so, you have to do all sorts of fun little tricks of the trade, right? For example, we have bitter blockers, so compounds that basically nullify or stop your bitter receptors from working, and they have to work specifically for the compounds found in cannabis extracts. Not every bitter blocker works the same, and so there's that. And then there's also, you have to emulsify it because these cannabis oils do not dissolve in water, so you have to figure out a way to get it into solution, but without rendering it basically ineffective or separating over time during shipment or distribution or even during storage.
So there's, on top of all that, I mean, we certainly have, obviously, based on consumer preferences, taste preferences, and sweeteners. I know, like, a lot of people who are drinking these drinks, they don't want the high sugar, and they also don't want, like, the fake sugar. So you got this balance of how you get the right tasting in this. But then on top of this, we also have the clean label demands and the safety
Mhm.
kind of stuff that's going on, because it's not just drinking, a water, right? There's cannabinoids in here. So,
Yep.
there's a lot of challenges in here. And when we get to the fact that where we're looking at sort of this intersection with, with the actual regulations, it's interesting to see how that's all going to come together, but also how we're starting to see things of other nutraceuticals and functional ingredients that other people are taking, how that's all interacting with these cannabinoids. And I've learned some of that, because I learned that, with the cannabinoids I take, if I take like an omega-3 fatty acid, it
Yeah.
reduces massively the inflammation in my body.
Mhm.
So I've experimented with a lot of these things. What are you seeing there as far as how these things, sort of nutraceuticals and functional ingredients in these sodas and the cannabinoids, sort of mix together?
There's so many different options on the table, and I think part of it is, consumer education. I think a lot of people don't understand a lot of these ingredients, and to be honest, some players take advantage of that. And I think there's a lot of marketing, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of non-scientific sort of feel good vibe experience where you're not really looking at the bioactives. You're not really, or you're including them, but far below the threshold that's required to actually have some kind of effect or biological activity. And I think that's a big shame, because we'll take an example of like mushrooms. People really love mushroom extracts and nutraceuticals, but the question is, how much is in there? Is there really enough to do anything, right? And then to your point, you've got things like omega-3 fatty acids that are well researched, that people have conducted studies for decades, and now we can combine that with cannabinoids and see the effect. But these synergies are truly unknown, and I think by without having all that in-depth research, it's just kind of a question mark as far as, are we really doing what we're doing and saying what we're doing? I would love to see more research there. I would love to see people, trying out multiple different combinations and seeing if there really is something to be said about, I don't know, so let's say like L-theanine and combining it with cannabinoids. Trying to find other nutraceutical compounds, 5-HTP. There's all sorts of different things that are well researched. But then you also have the players that say, let's throw in like a cordyceps extract, but at 0.001%, we'll just throw it on the label. It doesn't do anything, right? And I think that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, so I've seen that, and by the way, in my own health journey, because I've been on this tact over the years to get off of pharmaceuticals, which I've been successful with in gastro health. But what I found is, you talk about research. The research has been all on my own. Like, try a
Mhm.
combo of this, try a combo of that, cut this out, and really keeping track of this, because we do know that the endocannabinoid system is personal, right?
Mhm.
And it can react differently for me than it does for you, than it does for Joy. So, it really is experimentational. However, the research is almost void on a federal level, because when you look at the cannabis industry, it's not federally legal. Hemp,
Right.
obviously, we're still operating under the 2018 Farm Bill, expected to
Right.
change in 2025. We'll see. But you look at places like Israel, and they've been doing research since the 50s. And
Right.
it's like, and we can't get our stuff together, because here you are, a chemist and scientist, that research is what drives knowledge. And
Mm.
without that research, I mean, to your point, how do we know? So
Right.
that brings up sort of the fact that the current state of THC extraction in this industry from hemp and particularly with hemp, there's a lot of regulatory loopholes. And
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing, these gray areas, particularly since we're still operating under 2018 Farm Bill and hoping to see some change. But now we see states waffling back and forth, proposing, well, let's get rid of this product, let's get rid of that product. What are your thoughts about all that, and how is that holding us back?
I mean, because it's so state to state, I feel like everyone is kind of going at it their own way, addressing that 2018 Farm Bill as saying, we're just going to either flat out remove all those products from the table, or, maybe we'll allow some of the products or have it be kind of like again, like a gray area of like how are we actually regulating this space? And I think it's really unfortunate because the whole spirit of that farm bill was to be able to use hemp in a lot of different applications.
Yes.
But by taking advantage of it and using it to extract, THC and other cannabinoids and putting into beverages, it just now I think it does a disservice for the industry and as a whole, because how do people trust that producers are going to do exactly what they're supposed to do, or play by the rules, when they're just kind of like skirting this sort of regulatory loophole? Then the other issue I think is also, I think it's going to be something that needs to be taken to the federal level at some point, because you can't just have products being produced in one state and then product that can't be produced in another state, and then like how do you control the interstate commerce in those terms? Or if you want to take it, let's say you want to take it like from one state across another state that says no, but then there's a third state that says yes, right? Like that's just kind of crazy. Like it becomes such a nightmare, and then you have to have all the bureaucracy and make sure that where everything is coming from. I feel like that's just doesn't make any sense.
Well, to me, I think the problem also becomes the opportunity, because what's happening in the THC beverage space right now is it's really thriving on these federal loopholes, right? That we
Mhm.
see, and but it does face an existential risk depending on what happens with this farm bill. So to me, the easiest solution is let's get back to the basics of what hemp and CBD are. I mean, like a lot of these synthetics that are being created, I would trust the pharma industry to create a synthetic because there's so many, guidelines around it and oversight. But, trusting this industry to create a synthetic, I'm not really sure I'm feeling good about that.
Sure.
And I don't think consumers understand that either. And, we talked earlier about the fact that all the fraud going on in testing and, a lot of problems in this space. So we do know that, you know, there's a question of authenticity, of quality, of transparency in the space. There's a lot of loopholes that are being taken advantage of in the country with this particular product. But it raises the question, okay, who's regulating the space now and who should be? I mean,
Mhm.
that's because it's not like what you're used to in food science, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's gosh, because we don't have such a clear-cut idea. And this is something that has been going on for decades as far as like who's regulating what, right? Like for example, the FDA and the USDA, when it comes to meat, like there's a really weird line. Like if it's cut from the animal and it's processed a certain way, it's under USDA. But if it's processed another way, it goes under FDA. So that's kind of the same scenario that we're going to see here, which is from a federal level, if there is regulation, it's unclear where it'd be from, these different organizations. But then on the state level, that's also kind of unclear cut, because now you have each state with their own, lines of ideas of what exactly the product is. Like there's definitions and guidelines that need to be defined, and some of them don't have definitions, right? Like some of them haven't even gone through the whole process of even considering that this is going to be a problem. So it's definitely a bit of a mess. And it would be nice if the FDA was the one regulating, because in a lot of ways, while it's not, it's tricky because cannabis is neither, I wouldn't really call it a nutraceutical, but I also wouldn't call it necessarily a drug, and not in the conventional sense. So it's really, it's always been a little tricky, and I think any supplement or nutraceutical has always been kind of sitting in this weird gray zone in itself. It's not fully regulated as a food nor a drug. And I think cannabis is going to end up in sort of that similar arena, and where maybe it needs its own separate regulatory body, in the same sense that alcohol is regulated as a separate entity from all other foods and drugs.
Well, alcohol, the alcohol industry, liquor industry is obviously lobbying for these cannabis beverages to come their way, right? We're seeing a lot of that happen. In fact, we just saw in Georgia they approved, these things around cannabis beverages, and they said, but you need to have a sort of a retail license to do it, not
Mhm.
just liquor stores. So they got bombarded by liquor stores, grocery stores, and they don't know. I mean, they're just bogged down now in applications. But you mentioned something, sort of when you were talking about sort of the meat industry, which was an interesting parallel. We have that problem, as you indicated, in this space. In fact, next week we're going to have Joe Hickey on, who is a big advocate for hemp. And Joe was recently at NOCO, so he's going to give us a state of the industry. And one of our guys, Drew Harris, was at NOCO, and he characterized it as the Civil War is alive and well between the agricultural growers and the psychedelic side of the business.
Yep.
And I think that that's probably an adequate description. There's like this civil war going on where there's big disagreements. Well, you got USDA over here. Okay, they're going to take care of the agricultural side. And then you got FDA. Well, they should be taking care of the psychedelic side. But nobody has really made that separation of
Mhm.
language and definition, although folks are trying to, so we
Mhm.
can create these two camps that could live well together. So, we're going to wait and see. But meanwhile, we're dealing with a patchwork of regulations in some strict states, some not so strict states, emerging frameworks, minimal regulations. And I don't know who's getting it right or who's not, but it's all over the place. So, it's like one of those wait and sees. Yeah, do you have any predictions as to what do you think the FDA is going to do about this space?
It's interesting because we're now reeling for, the loss of a lot of the, FDA infrastructure. So it's really unclear what it's going to look like, in the next 5 to 10 years. I would hope that, the FDA takes a stronger stance, as far as making sure. Like, first, I would like to see it, legalized on a federal level, but then also, regulated at the federal level, so that, you can actually put the resource into making sure that we have these guidelines that you're pointing out. Like, when you extract something, and this is also again a problem in the food industry, you extract something, and you take certain components from it, like let's say the flavors, or the bioactive aspect. Then you've like removed it from the agricultural product, and then you've converted it into something else. But is that something else? Is that another agricultural product, or is that another food product, or is it is it a flavor, or is it is it a psychoactive drug, right? So like, to your point, where things are and having an exact line as to when that conversion happens is really key. And you really can't have this sort of jigsaw puzzle of some people thinking, yeah, it's fine. Like, sure, you can throw alcohol into it and extract it, and that's cool. Like, that counts as like a food, whatever. Or someone's like, hey, like, another state's like, oh my gosh, you extracted it. That's Now it's a drug. Like, now you've concentrated it. Right. And so it's just legal definitions of ingredients is such a huge problem, in the food industry. And it becomes increasingly more minute, as you really get into the chemistry of things. The hope is that we don't really go to the point where it just becomes a bureaucratic nightmare. I wouldn't want to see, you know, entrepreneurs and businesses not being able to move forward just because there's all this paperwork of having to prove, you know, the exacts, we'd like ranges. We don't need like exact numbers, but
Right.
we also would like to know if it has lead and cadmium. Right?
Yeah, that would be helpful. I know that I characterize this industry, as not unregulated or overregulated, but misregulated, and I think
Mhm.
that's really the point we have. But sort of back to the THC beverage and the cannabis beverage side, one of the things that's driving this is this California sober, right? This concept of California sober, where we're seeing this fundamental shift in attitudes, is particularly in younger people.
Mhm.
When it comes to socialization, it used to be, I mean, back in the day, it would be you have a drink and a cigarette in your hand. Now we lost the
Sure.
cigarette, and now we're starting to lose the drink, right? The
Yeah.
alcohol, and now it's really about more on wellness. So talk to me about that trend and how you see that continuing and how that's going to impact this sort of THC and cannabis beverage market.
Yeah, I think COVID definitely highlighted a lot of people's concerns and fears about health. And there's definitely two sides of it where, some people were saying we don't want to put, compound in our bodies that we're not comfortable with, which, is to their right. And then, you have also people saying like we need to make sure that we are all vaccinated and so on and so forth. So not getting into the politics of that, but certainly I think because of that contention that occurred, I think a lot of people became aware that they needed to have a healthier lifestyle because, we were talking about immune systems, we were talking about, what could have increased the probability of, catching COVID and other diseases. So, and one of it is inflammation. I think inflammation has become the core central tenet of disease. Like the disease model is no longer so much, one thing causes this thing, but almost like inflammation is sort of this vague term that can infiltrate all sorts of disease progression, whether it's cancer, whether it's, neurodegenerative diseases, and sort of more of the long-term chronic conditions, cardiovascular, for example. And I think that makes, that has sort of driven a lot of young people to be, more concerned about that. And there's a lot more things that you can drink now or consume that are anti-inflammatory, like cannabis products,
Mhm.
like omega-3 as an example. But certainly we now know that alcohol and smoking increases oxidative damage, right? So there's sort of like these maybe people don't fully understand the whole picture, but certainly there's a feel of we don't want any more oxidative damage, whether that's through pollution, that's through the water that we drink, the foods that we eat, which are high in fried foods have a lot of oxidative compounds. So we're trying to move towards more, oh, what are foods that will sort of reduce that damage or increase our body's ability to sort of enhance our immune system. And I think that's where we're moving more and more towards these nutraceutical beverages, or better for you, different types of food products. And I think that really is the trend that's happening here.
It is a trend, and hopefully the regulators will recognize that this is what consumers are looking for, and they'll drive some better standards that are enabling standards and not crippling, to your point earlier, standards where we're just making it so difficult to be in business. But I mean,
Mhm.
you got to look at the numbers. I mean, the percentage of adults under 35 who were drinking alcohol fell from 72% in 2001 to 62% in 2023. So I think you may be right. COVID might have had something to do with that, right? At the same time, we're looking at in a 2022 survey that was done, and this has changed dramatically. I was trying to find the new numbers, but at the time, 69% of young adults age 18 to 24 actually preferred cannabis over alcohol. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we're seeing this trending on the younger side, but I mean, I'm not in that age group. I mean, barely, I'm just out of it, but, but, you know, I was a regular, like end of the week, you know, have a
Sure.
scotch, you know, at the end of a difficult night, have a scotch. I haven't bought a handle of scotch in probably 3 months, but,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if I've had a particularly stressful day and I'm home, I don't need to go anywhere, I might pop a little bit of, you know, rosin gummy that just takes the edge off, still
Yep.
makes me functional, and it's much healthier. So, I'm
Mm-hmm.
finding in myself that, you know, although I enjoy a scotch every once in a while now, it's not my regular thing like it used to be.
Sure.
So, I
Sure.
really see that this is becoming almost sort of where it's going to drive social acceptance into the product as sort of a gateway, you know, and I hate to use the term gateway because now we're thinking gateway drug, which is, you know, a misnomer.
The other gateway.
The other gateway, a good gateway, like step through that, you know. But it's going to sort you know, this concept is, I think, going to start introducing people into this social acceptance and this familiarity with cannabis through these cannabis beverages. So to
Mm,
me, I think it's an amazing gateway to
sure.
get there, but we have to get safety right. We have to get dosing right. We
Yes.
have to, like, you know, say, let's drink a 6-pack of this stuff and, you know, and see how it makes us feel. We still have to, you know, be responsible. And it's one of the things that
Yes.
I'm constantly talking about is responsibility, but the responsibility is not only on the part of the consumer, but on the brands. So having, you know, said that, I mean, what do you think are some of the key things and takeaways that the industry really ought to be focusing on to get this right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, definitely being above board, and making sure that they're transparent about their numbers because, at the end of the day, you can only trust so much. And we all rely on numbers to make sure that's the case. So if you got your lab testing, if you're trying to fudge numbers, I mean, that's just going to be a disservice in the long term. Then how can anyone trust, anything that people put out? And then, certainly, having your THC levels be be where they're supposed to be, and not more or less. And you certainly don't want people, overtaking. Certainly, you don't want people having, a psychotic break because they've taken like 3 times as more THC than they're supposed to, right? And you
Right.
certainly also don't want people, expecting a bioactive experience and really just not getting it, because it's all about the consumer experience. This is really important. And then just it would just having the standard food safety regulations in place. I mean, it's a beverage, you got to follow the beverage policies. Like you can't kind of like toe the line in halfway between. Like you got to make sure it's still safe from a microbiological standpoint, from a chemical standpoint, from heavy metals, pesticides, and so on and so forth. So that's I think that's a huge other factor. Um, I would like to see more lab players, and lab testing facilities be more rigorous, and certainly that's on the.
And truthful, that would be nice too, right?
Yeah, that would be nice. We should be seeing more strict, state and federal regulations on labs. I mean, that's just, I think, how else can we really reel them back? It would be nice if industry self-regulated. That would be huge. That would be great. But we know that sometimes the pot of gold is a little too nice, and some players take advantage of that. So.
Brian, somebody told me the other day that I was talking to that they went and visited the FDA lab facility and there was like 1 million square foot of lab. I mean, some crazy number. And it was like empty, like
Wow.
not a lot going on there. So, you know,
Wow.
so look, I'm all for cutting government waste in the right areas, but I think, you know, one of the key things is being able to see the FDA have the means for validating the testing. is very, very important, because if a lab is saying X, well, who's checking up on X, right? So I have a lot of ideas, by the way. I can take 3 hours talking about how we can automate that and solve that problem, but we're working on some of those things, but that's for another episode. So the one thing, Brian, you're doing some great work, and I think for the folks listening, or anybody who has a cannabis beverage brand or wants to improve it, or anybody who's thinking about getting into it, I mean, you could really help not only on the safety and regulatory side, but also on creating a product that consumers want to taste, right? And how to formulate them correctly in the right way. Your background, I think, is perfect for that, and I think this is a, pardon the pun, greenfield opportunity for you. Anyway, Brian, if somebody did want to get in touch with you to talk about all the great ways you can help them, how would they do it?
Yeah, you just gotta visit my website at mendocinofoodconsulting.com, or you can just type up my name, Bryan Quoc, and I pull up pretty fast. I've got a lot of articles I've written. I'm very opinionated, so
Yeah,
So,
well, and again, you're not a slacker, so,
I try.
doing some great work. Such an honor to have you on the show, and we really look forward to tracking your progress and the progress of this industry, and definitely staying in touch. Joy, next week, who's on Qredible Live?
Yeah, so we're excited to have our own Drew Harris on Qredible Live next week, as well as Joe Hickey, who is a really influential member and a good friend of those of us at Qredible, talking about the hemp space, talking about the NOCO conference, and getting kind of a recap of the various things that were handled and talked over and the trends that they're seeing. So excited to get that update from the guys.
Well, Drew calls it the Civil War of Hemp. Can we rename the episode?
Yeah, I'll do it. Agriculture versus psychedelics.
So Drew and Joe were both out at NOCO, so they're going to share their experiences there. We're looking forward to that. And Brian, once again, thank you so much for being on Qredible Live. It's really incredible, pardon the pun again, to have folks such as yourself share such great and deep knowledge with us in this industry. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, Brian. Thank you, Joy.
All right.